Hallo, herzlich willkommen. Welcome to PalaisPopulaire, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us online via our YouTube channel. We are gathered here at Deutsche Bank's Forum for Art and Culture, a public institution open 6 days a week, located on Unter den Linden, right in the heart of Berlin. My name is Svenja Reichenbach, and I'm the director of PalaisPopulaire. Our program is dedicated to contemporary art and culture. At the core of our art initiatives is the Artist of the Year award, which includes, among others, a solo exhibition that premieres here at PalaisPopulaire. This year, the award was given to Charmaine Poh, and we are honored to present her exhibition titled Make a Travel Deep of Your Inside and Don't Forget Me to Take. On the occasion of Charmaine Poh's exhibition here at PalaisPopulaire, we are delighted to host tonight's session in collaboration with the Asian Feminist Studio for Art and Research, of which Charmaine is a member. AFSAR is a vibrant platform for transnational dialogue and mutual exchange between Asian and diasporic Asian artists. So please join me in welcoming Park Hye-in, welcome, Mooni Perry, both here with us at PalaisPopulaire, and Christina Yuna Ko, hello, and Charmaine Poh, hello, welcome. It's so great that you're joining. It's so great that you are all here tonight. And we are especially thrilled also that Sonja Eismann will be moderating tonight's session. We had the pleasure of working with her already 2 years ago on the occasion of our exhibition with La Chola Poblete. Sonja is a cultural scholar and journalist, and she's co-founder of the Missy Magazine. Her work focuses on feminism and pop culture through writing, research, and also through teaching. And tonight's event actually is also taking part on the occasion of Berlin Science Week 2025. But now, I think we should start. And I'm very happy to hand over to you, Sonja, and I'm wishing us all an inspiring evening. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and thanks for hosting this event tonight. And I will give a quick introduction of today's participants. And then we will listen to a hybrid in-person and online reading of letters with visual materials that will be up on the screen here. And then we will launch into a discussion here up on the panel, which you will be invited to join later on. So let me please first introduce Charmaine. You can see here, lives in Berlin and Singapore and works with video installation and performance. She was named Artist of the Year by Deutsche Bank this year, and her multimedia narratives center on identity and power structures, feminism and queerness in Southeast Asia. In her work, multiple perspectives and perceptions, past and future, overlap like a flowing stream of consciousness. In Make It Travel Deep of Your Inside and Don't Forget Me to Take, which is on show here right at the moment, she also investigates time travel, ecology, and resistance, drawing from her upbringing in Singapore. And then also joining us digitally is Christina Yuna Ko. She lives and works in Queens, but is in Seoul at the moment. And they're both staying up in the middle of the night for us because, I think 1:30 and 2:30 where you are at the moment, yeah. So Christina is also a member of AFSAR, as of course every one of the participants tonight. Her work reclaims the visual language living in the Asian diasporic experience as a means of imagining and speculation. She received her MFA from Columbia University and a BFA from Cornell, and she has participated in programs at the Palais de Tokyo in Paris, Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong, and at CHAT in Hong Kong, among others. And then here in person, please let me welcome Mooni Perry. Was born in Seoul, lives and works in Berlin and Seoul. She studied painting in Seoul and London, but works predominantly in video, installation and performative formats today. Her artistic practice intriguingly interweaves documentary and academic research with fantasy, speculation, gaming, and science fiction. She explores individual and collective realities, often employing feminist discourse, sociological inquiry, or investigations into human-animal relationships, and being reminded that the human experiences lies beyond the linear. Park Hye-in, to my left, is a curator and researcher based in Berlin and Seoul. Through her curatorial practice and research, she explores contemporary art from East Asia through socio-political contexts and further analyzes the complex relationship between power and art as shaped through hegemonic processes such as institutions, policies, laws, and discourses. And she is also a founding member of Amalgam. Yes, and now we will proceed to the readings because 4 members of the collective, AFSAR, who are joining us tonight, have started a process of writing letters back and forth, and we will now have the chance to listen not only to the letters, but also look at the accompanying visual materials that you chose specifically for this lecture. So, thank you.
Okay, I'll start. Dear Mooni, Hye-in, and Christina, thank you for agreeing to be part of this special program with me. I'm grateful to have found AFSAR pretty early on in my adjustment to living in Berlin. Looking back, I know that one of the reasons my intellectual and artistic pursuits have blossomed here is because of our time studying together. Everyone has been traveling. Over the last year, I focused my research on how stories have unfolded in Singapore, where I was born and raised. Because of its history as a port, it lies at the confluence of so many migration cultures, stories, rituals, and the like. I have been making work starting from the port of arrival, and there are 3 migrants who have become the protagonists of The Moon is Wet: Matu, Mate, and Monique. The influx of immigrants from Fujian in the 19th and early 20th centuries brought with them the worship of Matu, whose temple was erected by what was then the shore and what is now the central business district. There are still fiercely loyal devotees, but as much of Singapore's shoreline and relationship with the sea has evolved, so has the island's relationship to Matu. Simultaneously, Matu has seen a recent resurgence overseas, with more and more young people reportedly worshiping her in Taiwan and Fujian province, to the point that she has become part of China's geopolitical strategy. The Mate, also known as the Comb Sisters or the Self-Combed Women, came to Singapore during the decline of the silk industry in Guangdong, China, from the 1920s until the 1970s. They were known as Singapore's first domestic workers. In Singapore, they are often simplistically characterized in official state narratives as frugal royal laborers who contributed to a broad nation building. A decade ago, in 2015, I met and photographed a few of the Mate who chose to remain in Singapore. They were already in their twilight years then. I found their decisions to be radical for their time, and learned about other aspects of their lives, their relations with one another, their organizing of the Seven Sisters Festival, and the rich history of women's autonomy in Guangdong. In Singapore, there is barely any physical evidence left of the Mate. The Gupok, the communal houses they had built for themselves, have been all but torn down. Some still exist in Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Guangzhou. In the 70s, the Mate was slowly replaced by domestic workers from the Southeast Asian region. The third character is Monique, a domestic worker from Semarang, Indonesia. Foreign domestic workers in Singapore are subject to a tight biopolitical order, which restricts their romantic and sexual intimacies. They are among the most vulnerable communities in Singapore. I drew lines between the three characters across time, languages, and lands as a way to create a speculative ancestry. Walking from the port of arrival often means that something has been lost along the way. Ties severed, roots cut, gone missing or forgotten, perhaps purposefully. Because so much of my biological family's history has been inaccessible to me, largely due to their silence, I turned to a kinship beyond the body. It's my way of feeling close to my land. So yes, perhaps I traveled back to the land I know, and back in time. Now I turn to you. What have your travels brought you? What are the overlaps and departures between your discoveries and mine? So looking forward to hearing all the stories. With love, Charmaine.
Hello, Charmaine, and hello, Hye-in and Christina. Thanks for your email. It's so tender. There are so many resonances between your research and mine. The question of root and originality, creating through laws, Com sisters and Chaigu as examples of female communities, the various female deities they worshipped, domestic workers in Hong Kong, and etc. Here, I want to first lay out some of my confusions and questions during my residency in Hong Kong. The relation between Com sisters and Guanyin. Guanyin as a guardian of their life. How can you understand many female deities, mostly tied to the values of fertility, traditional family, and childcare today? How can we retell the Seven Fairy celebration in a way that's not tied to romantic love? How do female deities have such similar life stories, resisting marriage, becoming deity through their exceptional abilities, such as healing, martial art, Buddhist studies, foreseeing the futures, etc.? Or through tragic stories? In a time when having children is no longer critical, how should we understand this goddess belief? But isn't now exactly when we need goddess faith the most? Like to have a role model of their single life? Yet, maybe new goddess belief don't emerge because fandom cultures already fulfill that space? Why did I invite AFSAR peers on this journey? What do I need to learn from my research for my life? Funnily enough, what constantly comes to my mind is the topic of death. The theme of death lingered throughout our journey in China and Hong Kong. It was also the month of Hungry Ghost Festival. I had a chance to witness it thoroughly, from its opening to the closing day. The Hungry Ghost Festival is an East Asian ritual dedicated to the ancestral and wandering ghost, wandering spirit, born from the fusion of Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism belief and custom. on the 15th days of the 7th lunar month, the day when the gate of the underworld opens, it is believed that hungry souls return to the living world. People offer food, burn Josh paper, and pray for the peace for both ancestor and orphaned spirit. By the way, our public event in Hong Kong was actually the last day of the Hungry Ghost Festival. Christina and I were watching so many YouTube videos about Korean shamanism during that time. We cried every single night, haha. I mention this because it wasn't just about the festival. Death kept appearing in the research topics too. For Chaigu and Kom sisters, having a place to live together wasn't enough. Because, as you know, we live briefly in this life within this body, but our spirit live on through reincarnation. Just because you don't remember your past life doesn't mean there is no linkage between them. So the Kom sisters and Chaigu wanted their deaths to be handled within their own community, under the guidance of Guanyin. Because Guanyin cares not only for this life, but also for the afterlife. Mian Dashi, who function like policemen in the afterlife, is another form of Guanyin we encounter many times during our travel. In the end, the female deities we researched were once wandering ghosts. They are the Kom sisters eventually. Those who lost their homes and decide to build their own, whether as temple or gupok, the Kom sister house. In old times, the Kom sisters were considered homeless ghosts because it was essential that your body be buried in your hometown with your family members. If not, you became a wandering ghost, forgetting who you are, unable to be reincarnated, stuck between lives. But ghosts can become deity if they do good for people. And that's why these ghosts work so hard to ascend. Haha. And I want to rewrite the stories around female deities, not as a figure of childbirth and fertility, but as a radiant superstar. I imagine they must feel very pity that people only pray to them for those reasons, though they can offer so much more. Let's build a fandom culture around them. Imagine us living in prosperity with them. Okay, that's all for today. Talk to you soon again and sleep well. Oh, and my question for the next writer, I guess, is Hye-in. What did you learn in Korea this time? So curious to hear. Warmest, Mooni.
Dear Mooni, and also Charmaine and Christina, your letter stayed with me for days. I thought I would write a short reply, but as I began, the thread unraveled. Perhaps because your letter carried trace of our July days in Hong Kong, the humidity of the air, the spinning machines factory, the voice of woman that still echoes somewhere between the cold air of air-conditioned shops and the breath-stopping sense of incense burning in the temples. Reading your reflections felt like returning to that in-between space where questions unfold rather than conclude. Since arriving in Korea, I had traced similar thread in Anyang, the city where I was born. Like Hong Kong, Anyang once thrived as an industrial hub from the 1950s to the 1980s, filled with textile factories, mechanical workshops, and the rhythm of woman's neighbor. I tried to find the woman who once worked there, hoping to hear their voice in person. But this time I found no one. The trace had vanished, buried beneath redevelopment projects, erased from city records, and perhaps most painfully from people's collective memory. That absence itself became a present. During the Japanese colonial period, Anyang's textile factories, later converted to military and industrial use, became key to post-war modernization. Yet, by the 1980s, when the factories closed, the women who built those kind of legacy could not afford to live in the neighborhood that rose on their ruins. They are nowhere to be found in the very city they have created. But the city was not just built by them, it was woven through them. In the official narrative of modernization, they were reduced to legend, a metaphor called the 3,000 Court Lady of Anyang. The title echoes a myth from the far of Baekje, where 3,000 women are said to have thrown themselves into a river after their kingdoms collapsed. But why were those factory women, modern neighbors, and skilled agents of production remembered not as a subject of modernization, but as symbol of collective sacrifice? Why is woman's neighbor so often narrated through the language of disappearance, devotions, and death? Perhaps what we call modernization is not merely a historical process, but a ritual that keeps returning under different forms. In this ritual, women's bodies have been made both the ground on which new industries rise and the offering through which progress demand is sacrificed. Their hands built the material foundation of modern life, textile, circuits, garments, yet their presence was erased the moment the factory gates closed. When you wrote about the Com sisters, the ghostly deities who refused marriage, created their own communities, and were remembered as wandering spirits, I thought about those women in Anyang. They are to become ghosts in their own city. Their factories are gone, their names forgotten, but their neighbor continue to pulse beneath the streets. They are not haunting us as a victim, but as a quiet ancestors, asking to be remembered differently, not through mourning, but through care. This research has shifted for me. It is no longer about reconstructing their life as historical evidence, but about sensing how they still move through mine, through ink-stained envelopes, folded payslips, and the smell of oil on old fabric. Perhaps this research is an ethical choreography, negotiating what can be remembered, what must remain silent, and what can only be felt. It is a gesture toward us, the living and the dead, the spoken and the erased. When you wrote that we might be partial reincarnations of those who came before, I found myself returning to that line again and again. Maybe those women are not gone. Maybe we're living through their unfinished gestures, their partial reincarnations. Maybe our writing, our screenings, our gatherings are not merely acts of research, but rituals of return, small ceremonies of reweaving the living and the lost. And so this is no longer only about history. It is about ethic of connection, how to listen without consuming, how to stand beside without possessing, how to hold the thread without trying it into a fixed knot. Perhaps what we are doing is, in its own way, a form of shamanic labor, a quiet mending between words, with love and in sisterhood, Hye-in.
Dear Hye-in, Mooni, and Charmaine, I wanted to share a line from my Batse, Saju, or Four Pillars of Destiny, I found on a scanned page in my childhood home. I came across it right before I left for Hong Kong. It said that I must leave my birthplace. I'm typing this letter while staring at the ocean. I'm in Jeju Island, and the residency I'm doing is located right at the edge of the water. I rewatched The Moon is Wet yesterday night while listening to the waves outside my window as they crashed into the shore. The resonances of all our travels reverberating. Like Hye-in, I felt absence. During my travels with Mooni through Hong Kong and southern China, through the intensity of the heat, humidity, and the amount of information we were taking in, I felt a strange emptiness. The rituals there consumed every sense. I remember the thick smoke of incense, the fire, the towering paper craft displays, the hum of chanting and the prayers, the visual density of the deities in their perches, fresh cut flowers, stacks of food and paper as offerings, and the saltiness of tears and sweat. This embodied knowledge of ritual was something I had never experienced, and my body felt the emptiness of the lack. The Combe sisters, their shrines to Guan Yin and their gukpok, their homes where they lived and where they passed on, their proximity to spirituality in the everyday was absent in mine. In our travels in Hong Kong, Mooni and I came across locations where hundreds of figures of deities were gathered. We learned that when people moved far away, they would often rehome the statues of deities, placing them on the side of the road, on tops of hills, and in other temples. There are places where you can find thousands of them, like in Aberdeen. A friend told us that because we can't trace whether these statues went through the proper ritual to be opened, where there should be deities could be ghosts, so we should be careful. Another friend told me that the design of public housing complexes in Hong Kong accommodated shrines in the home, so that is why so many of these statues proliferate. While traveling, we saw many houses with paper talismans affixed to their doors, small shrines located at their entrances, and deities enshrined inside. We also saw many small shops with the same. Because we were in Hong Kong during Ghost Month, we saw shops, particularly ones that sold joss paper, burning paper offerings placed alongside food for hungry and wandering spirits. I was thinking about the ghosts of women laborers whose stories have disappeared mentioned in Hye-in's letter, and her consideration of them as quiet ancestors. With their traces left in the landscape their labor helped build, I wonder how we can remember. The power of ritual I witnessed during my travels has been a mending, as Hye-in says, of time. Caring for ghosts rewrites their past into our present. In the home, this care can take many shapes, creating a critical, intimate space, a relationality that Han Byung-chul describes in The Disappearance of Rituals as axes of resonance that are vertical, for example, to the gods, the cosmos, time, or eternity, horizontal within one's social community, and diagonal with respect to things. But what do we do in their absence? I came to Korea to find rituals I had lost, or perhaps never knew. I was born and raised in the Northeast US and never had many chances to travel. Now, on the third month of this research journey, I feel like rather than searching outward, I'm trying to return to the intimacy of ritual, despite being so far from home. Where can I make room for a ritual? In what shape can it take as it enters into my hands? And how can it ground me wherever I find myself? This being my first time on Jeju Island, I'm still searching as I come across spiritual sites mixing Buddhism with Korean folk religion, Confucianism, and local mythology. I'm still wandering, seeking our quiet ancestors, those whose lives resonated with ours, those whose ghosts still linger where we dwell, the deities that share our suffering, and a land to call home. Before I left for Jeju, I met a mudang, or a Korean shaman, to ask where I should live. In that process, she told me that AFSAR members were likely once part of the same witch shaman group, and that we met again because we can hear the voices of women that need their stories told. Excited to hear more of your stories, and apologies for this long letter. With much gratitude, Christina.
Dear Christina, Hye-in, and Mooni, reading all your letters once more has been emotional. I say this as the morning sun beams into my apartment in Berlin. It is clear as day, even in my mind and heart. Christina, I love that the Mudang told you this. It is remarkable that we are doing exactly that, bringing back stories of other women across space and time, to rewrite them, as Mooni said, such that they are remembered for things other than, quoting Hye-in, disappearance, devotion, and death. Ironically, when I was in Jogja, Indonesia earlier this year, a shaman tarot reader told me that she knew me in our past lives. I was a Japanese actress who committed suicide after being jilted. Of all things to die for, I hope this time I die for something else. Researching in this way is like listening for a whisper in a loud room. As Mooni recounted in her newsletter, the richness of these stories are barely found in official narratives. And the moon is wet, the scene of the Maze, the Kom sister, washing their hair together, came from a memory of a friend's relative who would see a Maze washing her hair in a basin in the communal corridor of the flat. The matching bangles were informed by a researcher telling me about a casual conversation she had with an uncle from the Clan Association in Singapore's Chinatown about two particular Maze who were always together with these jade bangles. I came across an old Facebook post that said the same thing. Monique, the Pelangi or Rainbow domestic worker in the film, was working for a friend, a wife, and their baby. There is scant information on queer relations between domestic workers in Singapore otherwise. I managed to find a book about Hong Kong, which is reportedly the first ever. Stories pass through, layer and zigzag, like a spherical maze. But this is not new. Women throughout history have had their own ways of passing along whispers. I'm reminded of Ni Shu, the women's script that was used by Yao women in Hunan, China. One way that they communicated was through handkerchiefs, folded, discreet. Ni Shu informed the graphic design of the moon's wet. Hye-in and Mooni came to see my exhibition on Sunday, and we ended up chatting in the cafe for hours. I kept thinking to myself how wonderful this was, just to sit and talk like this on a sunny day in no hurry. I will keep today's letter a bit shorter. Mooni says she'll write a review of sorts. I'm curious. Warmest, Charmaine.
Dear all, these days I'm talking with myself every day and try to understand what I have been missing, what I didn't learn. I'm praying to the goddess so badly more than ever. The Korean expression 싹싹 빌다 has an image of rubbing hands together honestly. I receive oracle from online Maju temple almost every day. I really believe many shamans saying that you are the god. When you read even academic papers on shamanism from different cultures, they all say the same thing, that people actually have multiple spirits inside of them. And everyone has gods inside of them. I mean, multiple spirit can be mean also God. I'm not trying to be mystical, but I understood this from this anecdote from the Berlin when I joined ritual by a Hindu community. Recently, I joined Kali Puja in Berlin. It's a day for total destruction and rebirth. It was by Hindu calendar New Year Day also. A lady I met from the ritual taught me about Kali goddess. She said although Kali has a fearful and violent figure, It's just for human to understand that status of us. It's just for us to grab and stay within that energy. If there is a visual figure, it's easier to channel ourselves. So based on this learning, what I mean that everyone has God inside of them is, first, literally, you didn't come out to this world out of nothing. There are some members from your family, either far or close, who sometimes decide to stay with us. 2, Shaman says, especially for Korean, everyone is the descendant of 7-star God. So every Korean has 7-star God thread. And yes, this can be differ from your birthplace. 3, there are 3 different God threads that everyone has: mountain God, dragon God, heaven God. And I think there are many small branches of this. 4, it will be your task to find your own God inside of you. Some people will never in their whole life. Some people will find somehow and understand their life better. What the hell are all these things about? Back to the Kali Puja. I'm saying it's all about channeling yourself. Channeling yourself to certain energy so you can overcome difficulties in human life. It was funny to listen that for some people, their guardian God works so hard that their clothes are like worn out. But humans think they're just very lucky without knowing. Believe this story or not, isn't it anyway so nice that you are not alone? Isn't it anyway so nice that you have a place to go back? Isn't it nice that you can pray somewhere? To me, praying is more like meditation. So I will stop myself to talk more mystical. I'm really purely so thrilled to know this part of knowledge. Also to understand Korea from Korea folk belief and shamanism. So back to Charmaine's exhibition. When I saw new work of Charmaine, The Moon is Wet, I laughed inside slightly, thinking, oh my God, Charmaine, you and I are dealing with exactly the same things, but from the opposite side, ha ha ha. You are such a tender storyteller to really kindly lay out the stories. In the ending credit, you say something like, this work is for ancestors? I'm not as kind as you, more drawn into very subjective perspective from the same stories, saying, we are the ancestors, and stories coming out from our mouths and gut. That's why in the end, I end up the missing video with AFSAR, when I search for 7 fairies, realizing that they're everywhere and we are actually one of them. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I often think misunderstanding is beautiful somehow. I love the tender color and blurriness, and also the speed of the video, Charmaine. You will discover so many things and goddess when you travel to Fujian and Guangdong. As you are planning, I'm excited to hear from you. In the end, I think it was a journey to find the perfect figure that I can channel myself easily. Anyway, I will end my rambling here. Yet I hope this email still carries some warmth. Talk to you very soon. Good night, Mooni.
Dear Mooni, Charmaine, and Christina, reading your messages, I kept thinking that what connect our work is not just the story we tell, but the movements through which the stories unfold, the subtle force of time and perception that keep reconfiguring what can be seen, felt, and shared. Charmaine, you phrase story path through, layer, and zigzag like a spherical maze. Stay with me deeply. I feel that your film, The Moon is Wet, does not simply represent those women's lives. It moves through them, folding and unfolding time itself. Deleuze once wrote that space and time do not exist as fixed coordinates, but as a pliable surface that fold into one another. Watching your work felt like entering such a fold, where the past and present, you and the Maze, we and our ancestors, all coexist not sequentially but simultaneously. The woman's gestures in your film don't just record history, they generate it again through the movements of the image, through your own hands and gaze. Mooni, when you said we are the ancestors, I felt that for the collapsing even farther, not as a metaphor, but as an embodied truth. The stories don't just belong to the past, they leak into us through our labor, through our gestures, through the ways we tell and retell. Misunderstanding, as you say, can be beautiful because it opens an unexpected path, a deviation that reveals new ways of knowing and sensing. In this way, I have been thinking about hacking as a creative and ethical method. To hack, in my sense, is not to destroy or reject, but to sense the system's blind spots. Your works, too, hack the temporal and emotional codes of history. Instead of repeating the given narrative, you move differently, creating new rhythms of relation and perception. This connects to my research on women textile workers in Korea, how their gesture, routine, and small breaks contain an unrecorded intelligence, a quiet resistance. Perhaps our collective task across place and generations is to continue hacking those forts, to move within what already exists, but differently, to sense the unmeasured, to give form to what was never meant to be seen. With love, Hye-in.
Dear Hye-in, Mooni, and Charmaine, thank you for your dear letters. So much resonates, the invisible voices and their murmurings. As I enter my last week on Jeju Island, I've been thinking a lot about these whispers, the soft echoes from stories untold, and the feelings of our embodied spirits. I'm writing after a day at the library, trying to find traces of the women deities here. Each region of Jeju has their own Ponyangdang, a shrine or house for the guardian spirit of the village to sit. Their seats in the shrine can take many forms, from trees, boulders, to cloth. I found that the shrines closest to me are hidden in plain sight, with no marker to indicate their significance, off of paved roads among overgrown grass and thick trees. Here, many of the stories of women who later became gods were full of tragedy, having been murdered, coveted, subjected to violence or ostracization. These women died with fire in their hearts. To appease their spirits in the afterlife, villagers would give them offerings, often at the site of their death or their graves. Over time, offerings became ritual, held on specific days annually, and the once vengeful spirits turned into guardians for their villages. Coming across so many of these stories made me think of Charmaine's words, of all the things to die for, I hope this time I die for something else, and Mooni's concern of becoming a wandering ghost. I kept thinking about the lack of choice in death and in the afterlife. These women deities became bound to their villages, protecting their inhabitants into the future. In death, were they able to forgive? There is one Ponyangdang called Pulenang Halmangdang, where men should not go because the god housed there, Pulenang Halmang, died at the hands of sexual violence and still keeps her resentment. As I came across their stories, the sites where they sit, many of which are at the risk of disappearing, I relate very much to Hye-in's words of approaching this with tenderness, slowness, and care. Being an outsider, I keep wondering what my role is as I find these spirits. I've been recreating small-scale paper crafts used in Jeju folk rituals every night because I'm unsure how to hold these stories or how to share them. I'm trying to keep myself open so as to catch whispers, but I'm still unsure of myself. So I wanted to end this email by asking how you listen, what helps you reach a place to take in these invisible stories, and what guides you once you're there. I hope your journeys are leading you to more whispers. P.S. This photo is of a Bonyangdang right around the corner from where I'm staying. It's closed and there's a sign prohibiting entry, yet the other day a friend and I were passing by and saw that there was a fish there, a trace of worship. Your friend, Christina.
Dear Christina, Hye-in, and Mooni, we're reaching the last round of email exchanges. Thank you for sharing all you have with me. Time spent on something will lead to a life lived. I think that by telling their stories, we are living our lives in companionship with them, holding tragedy, intimacy, and the miraculous close. And they become the way we live our lives. I wouldn't have it any other way. I've just reached Singapore again, wrapped in its sticky, gauzy heat, and in the stupor of jet lag, I am suddenly recalling my encounter with a friend's godmother here 2 years ago. To most of the world, she's just another auntie, someone you might bump into at the morning wet market. But within the confines of the apartment she shares with her husband, she is a spirit medium with her own devoted following. I love the opacity of such a life, how mysteries abound within us. Recently, I've been asking myself what it means to love myself, to choose myself out of love, not fear nor compensation. It continues to be one of the most radical acts one can do, in my opinion. I wonder if all of these goddesses, deities, and figures we've been researching love themselves too, or were trying their best to. I realize that all the characters in the moon is what demonstrate this, to me at least. Can you see it too? On that note, I will rest now. Sending love, Charmaine.
Dear friends, I'm writing from Seoul, having ended my time in Jeju, still lingering in its mysteries. I really love this idea of living in companionship with those stories whose stories reach us, their lives shaping our own. I agree that loving ourselves is a radical act, especially when so many external pressures that seek to take advantage of vulnerability tell us not to. And if we are carriers of these stories, then we should treat ourselves even more preciously. Having departed Jeju, I'm thinking about what happens when you leave, and if, like us, you're not rooted to a single place or homeland. I was reading that for many villagers in Jeju, their guardian spirit serves as the ancestors for the inhabitants, so that your connection to the land is as intimate as family. When you move, then you designate time in the year to journey back and pay your respects to the deity. If you move too far to return, you send money to help fund the maintenance of the local shrine. If you move so far that you cannot do either, then you bring the deity with you and set up a small shrine in your home to worship. I was thinking of how meaningful this connection to place must be and the possibilities it brings to the migrant as movers of whole cosmologies and worlds. I discovered that there's a shrine with Mazu in Incheon called Uisomdang, built by immigrants from the Shandong province. In this port city, the shrine opened in the mid-1800s and served not only as a site of religious worship, but a gathering place and a support system, providing mutual aid for those who could not return to China. I'm planning to make my way there before our program. To love ourselves is to love everything we carry with us. P.S. Sharing a photo of the shrine for Pulenang Halmang. Talk to you soon, and with warmness, Christina.
Dear Charmaine, Christina, and Mooni, in my field work, I encountered grueling conditions, long hours under a stifling heat, repetitive tasks, and cramped space where living and production were intertwined. Some studies report that those women occasionally sensed ghosts or invisible presence while at work. This is not merely superstition. It can be understood as the flow of sensations emerging where fatigue, memory, environments, and body intersect. This shows the invisible is not simply a metaphor. Bodies pushed to the limits by neighbor do not only store pain and fatigue, residue, echoes, and trace remain, appearing at the intersections of body, machine, and memory. Through interviews and archival research, I heard a wide range of experience: pride in completing difficult tasks, relief in sending remittance to family, the accomplishments of earning nice school degrees while working long shift. Alongside this, I also heard about aching limbs, suffocating air, and the stillness left behind when machine stopped. One worker described sensing movement behind her machine after night shift, perhaps not a ghost, but the body's own echo of neighbor. Macro-narrative industrialization, unions, the dormitory system help explain neighbor history, yet those structures alone cannot capture what occurs in workers' bodies and perception. This record visiting site in Hong Kong with Mooni, where female community once lived, founded by British police officer and now maintained by his family. At the time, I felt uneasy. The police officer's preservation, motivated by his fascination with the plant, now defines the site story, eclipsing the agency of the woman who once lived there. This hero narrative conceals the connection between their life and the British officer, the ways he was able to act because of them, and the link that continued to reach us today, which now erased. The same holds for factory field work. We need to sustain a tension between recording and accompanying, honoring the worker's voice, while also receiving the silence embodied in their experience. Though studying those women is not merely a matter of documenting neighbor or history, it is a practice of listening to existence, paying attention with care, and recognizing invisible flows that connect people across time, space, and generations. Although this may be the last letter in our correspondence, I do not take it as an ending. The thread of conversation weaving through ghost, neighbor, memory, and care remain unreserved, shaping how we listen, dwell, and relate to each other. Attending to the invisible yet perceptible foundations of connection, I will continue to follow the thread forward. With love and gratitude, Hye-in.
Thank you for this beautiful insight. Oh, I have to use the mic. Sorry. Yes. Thank you for this beautiful insight into your respective work processes and your research strategies. And before I dive into the common characteristics of your work together as a collective, I would like to go back to some of the things that you said in your letters and that especially stayed with me. Charmaine, you wrote that women throughout history have had their own ways of passing along whispers, and you reminded us of the Nushu, the women's script that was used by Yao women in Hunan, China, and you used the graphic design to inform the graphic design of The Moon is Wet, the script. And how can these female whispers be so powerful, communicating through handkerchiefs as you described? And do you see similar forms of communication still in existence today?
Yes, definitely. I think whispers can defy legibility for those for whom the whispers are not meant for. And legibility can be an important shield that protects as well. So an example that I think of that is still existing today would be this code that was formed in the UK for women who feel unsafe, for example, in bars, to go to the counter to ask for Angela. And that is a code that's developed to protect and is not legible for everybody, but to the people that matter, it can really make a difference. Or I think of queer people who go solely by roommates or best friends and these labels and don't bother with anything else that might be more direct in the presence of homophobes or in a neighborhood that may not accept them. And so I think these degrees of legibility, of hiddenness, very much reality still today.
Thank you, Charmaine. These are really fascinating parallels that I hadn't really thought about before. And now I want to go over to Hye-in, because in your letter you wondered, why is women's labor so often narrated through the language of disappearance, devotion, and death? And Christina, you also said female deities often have violent, tragic lives. So what is the function of this trope for you, this all this suffering and pain? And do you think it could ever be replaced with something else?
I was also wondering why the woman's neighbor narrative are always attached with the disappearance and the devote and death. Actually, I was surprised by exchanging the letter with the Charmaine, Mooni, and Christina, because it's also in their letter repeating. And based on my research on female factory workers, especially in Korea and Hong Kong, I think it has to do with historical and social structure, of course. And I think mostly in this capitalistic society, woman's neighbor often attached with a care and then repairing, and then a lot had to do with the community sense, which is maybe a little bit far distance with producing capital value and accumulations. So those kind of woman's neighbor usually remains no monument. So I think that was the reason their narrative often being disappeared and then remain as absent. So as a researcher and curator, how are we gonna deal with it? I think we have to re-navigate ourselves to deal with those narrative, because as also Charmaine say on the letter, we have to also perceive the silence as the existence of the communities. So I think we also need narrative about their silence as their present. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to come back to something that Mooni wrote that was on a more hopeful and powerful note, I think, because you said that you wanted to rewrite the stories around female deities not as figures of childbirth and fertility, but as radiant superstars. And you also mentioned that deities today might have been replaced by our fandom. So could you maybe elaborate on that?
Yes, so when we travel to Hong Kong and southern part of China, and previously I also travel a lot in Taiwan, you might get confused from those female deities, that why they're always tied with so-called this traditional value, like family, traditional family, and having child, fertility, which considered to be like the feminine value in old times. But actually, that's actually after interpretation by the which reflect the human desire, that there's a reason people start to worship those deities, that they have their own distinctive character in their life when they're alive, because many of those deities, they were once human being like us. They're not like from the heaven. But in their lifetime, they were outstanding with many different reasons. So people, and they use their ability to help the others. That's why people start to remember them. And if you have more people remembering them, they got ascended as a goddess. And that was the situation for female deities, or we also call them as a fairies in this region. But why we don't really remember their individual characters? Instead, they're always tied to this like a big category of the feminine value. That's why instead of to see them as a protector of the children or family or childbirth, maybe we can start to focus on their the abilities, why we start to worship them and see them as a radiant superstar like an idol. But at the same time, I'm also very much curious about why we don't have contemporary, very new female deity. That sadly in Korea, there are some young ladies commit suicide, but when they're alive, they were like radiant superstar also. But why we don't worship them as a female deity? Because I really think they really make a great impact on women's movement. But I don't know the exact answer, but I can only speculate, maybe because people don't live in this religious time anymore. Maybe they take it as obsolete things. But at the same time, maybe they already have a place where they can pull out their energy to focus, which is idol fandom culture already. So maybe we don't need this religious fandom culture anymore. But it was really fascinating for me to see when I was in Taiwan. It wasn't just about having faith when you believe female deity. It's not only about you going to temple and worship them. It's like it's very similar to the fandom culture. They wear the T-shirt of Maju and also wearing the key ring and the cute amulet, everything is very similar to the fandom culture. And this is something I want to navigate further.
Yeah, thank you. And this also somehow connects to a quote by Christina that I was struck by, because you wrote that caring for ghosts rewrites their past into our present. And so I was wondering, how do you maybe do that with your own work, or how can we maybe all do that? Like coming back to what Mooni just said.
So I was going to allude a little bit to what Mooni mentioned in her email as well. In Korean shamanism, the way that a shaman sees your fortune is by seeing your ancestors. And they often say that the ancestors that come to them are the ones that actually are similar to you, like in their own lives. So they can see you reflected through the lens of these ancestors that are there. So I think for me, it's about revisiting someone's past life in the present and how that becomes embedded within your own life as you hear their story and as you relate to the various details in their life. For example, as Mooni mentioned, many of the women who later become deities had an exceptional ability, and among them, often there's like skillfulness with their hands, for example, like the seven fairies are known for their weaving abilities. So I think being able to make that connection, like revisiting a story and then having it be embodied in our own time, is sort of how I think about rewriting the past into the present and caring for ghosts in a certain way. And I think about it often as more, I guess, with more relatability to intuition, because intuition is a space where I think we have so much certainty, like our intuition often tells us something, but in actuality, that intuition, we don't know where it's coming from. We don't know what is informing that intuition, but we know that we're sure about something. So I think that's sort of the space that I operate with this sort of care, is trying to listen, trying to understand that intuition, but also being very open to listening and seeing things, stories. I think we were talking about silences, but what does it take to actually listen to those silences and then take them on and carry them forward and have them become our own shape of intuition? And I think that's how you can sort of find your own way of caring for ghosts, is to listen to that intuition and be open. But also, since I was traveling with Mooni, I also became like a fangirl of these deities, and now I carry all of these amulets and key rings myself. So that also helps.
Okay, yeah, thank you for this kind of insight. And looking at your work and reading your letters, I was wondering if the story of female deities or female spirituality or shamanism or even identities in general is always bound to a story of loss, of silence and death. But does it then still at the same time, if this is even the case in your point of view, does this still lead to the creation of communities? What do you think? What did you take away from your research, your artistic creation in that respect?
I think to me it's pretty straightforward. I think loss is a very intrinsic part of storytelling and of narratives. I mean, Jesus died, right? And that's the loss of his life. And through that, gained salvation for humanity. That is also a story. And I think these are just forces that push a decision forward. So I don't necessarily think that it's limited to female deities, but I also acknowledge in agreement, I think with Hye-in, right, that earlier on that there's historical conditions for why a lot of the women who were living or who were worshipped had this kind of a certain level of suppression that was connected to them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, when I think of you as part of a bigger collective, I am wondering how you keep the collective alive. I mean, you do this kind of collaborative work where you write really beautiful, inspiring, insightful letters, is that typical for your way of keeping in touch with each other, or are there other ways in that you reach out to your community members or even try to find new kindred souls?
Yeah, maybe I can explain a little bit about AFSAR, her story.
Yes, please.
So I opened this space with Han Wen-jang, a curator and artist also based in Berlin from China, at the year of 2021. But whatever I say is after interpretation. Which is different from our first intention, why we need this space. But at the time, we just simply need a space where we can gather people around the around contemporary feministic discourses, and also we wanted to kind of archive some knowledges from our peers, and we just need an excuse to have this space so we can curate our own program, making art production, and also operating different study groups. And that was the very first intention. But we didn't actually know how it will grow, and instead we tried to let the number of us tell who we are instead of making manifestos saying, okay, this is the Asian feminism. We have about 400 people on Discord online. We don't have a physical space, but we didn't really intend to call out people actively. Instead, at the very beginning of our platform, we are very much focused on curating our own program with other peers, and also very much focused on art production. But later on, we realized it's not so sustainable if we are too driven to making something out of us, because every of us have their own main job, like working as a full-time artist, working as a PhD student. So it's like working with AFSAR members is additional things for them. So it can be very exhausting if we keep producing something. So instead, now we are more focused on studying together. And as I said, we have so many researchers and research-based artists and PhD students who anyway need to read a lot, need to research a lot. So they have this desire of having the research cluster, so they can share the knowledge and they can read the books, difficult philosophical books together. And in that way, people just come naturally because they also need those space outside of this academic realm. They need a place there where they can study together. So in that way, it just organically just grow a lot in online space.
Yeah, and from what I gather, I mean, Berlin is kind of not, I don't know if it's central, but it is important to your collective, but also the diasporic experience is like very, fundamental to your group, but also to your work. And how would you say, does that inform your work, because you all have different backgrounds, experiences, but I have the feeling that the diasporic experience, the experience of migration, the theme of waters, oceans to cross of fluidity is very central to your works. Is that accurate, or is that just like a projection?
I can say something short for myself is that we're all diaspora, primarily diaspora, living within a Western context. And so this idea of travel and having come from somewhere is a narrative that we have to narrativize for others that we encounter on a pedestrian, almost mundane level. And so I think it's intuitive that we would then address it in our work, because these assumptions about our origins, our level of integratedness, are things that confront us, whether or not we can always confront them, but sometimes they confront us, having moved here and being in this being, I guess, part of a minority background or group here in Europe or North America. So to me, it makes sense, why we would suddenly start to question it more and more and start to address this idea of travel more.
Yeah, it totally does make sense. And another thing that I think became really very clear throughout your lecture is that your work is very relies a lot research. I mean, we've seen really impressive materials that you gathered in your field work, and this event is also part of the Berlin Science Week. So I was wondering, how well does the concept of science, I mean, in German, science also encompasses the humanities, which it doesn't in English, but how does this concept of Wissenschaft, science, go together with your interest in the more spiritual aspects of communities, which a lot of times is still seen as a contrast, especially in Western contexts?
So this was a difficult question, so I prepared an answer.
Sorry.
So I will just read it out. I think to talk about science in my work, we first have to understand that science and religion are not entirely the separate domains. They both emerged from the same ground of human curiosity and cosmology. If we accept this, then the question itself becomes more interesting. That's also why within AFSAR, we create a study group like What is Asian Futurism?, where we read the Hong Kong philosopher Yu Kui's work on cosmotechnics as well. He argues that we need to redefine technology through each region's cosmology, because the dominant concept of science today is deeply rooted in Western cosmology. Unless we shake those roots, we can't really speak about technology or science in a more meaningful way. The Simondong also discussed the bifurcation between religion and science. And I find myself constantly returning to that point of divergence. Personally, I felt kind of recursiveness in the way different shamanic and the folk religions describe the relation between God and humans. I'm still thinking about how these connect to the cybernetics. For example, in Korean shamanism, the spirit that comes to me is often an ancestor connection by the blood, not a god from the sky, but a human who has become a ghost. Yet, that ghost, even through its family, is no longer the same. It has looped back with the new information, becoming a transformed version of kin. Belief like this differs slightly across East Asian tradition. Some remind me of first-order cybernetics, others of second-order. But maybe that recursive movement itself is a bridge between the spiritual and the scientific.
Yeah, thank you. That, I think, gives us a lot of food a lot of food for thought to think about the intersections of ancestors coming back, kinship versus godliness, and also the technological aspect of these movements. So maybe this would be a good time to open up the discussion to the audience. Maybe you have also thoughts on these connections between science, art, research, or other questions to what we heard and discussed so far. And I think there's also the possibility to ask questions via YouTube, if I'm correct. No, okay, sorry. So yeah, you just will have to make do with what we want to discuss. So, does anybody have a question or a comment or some further insight to the questions that we discussed? Yeah, I mean, what I also found really interesting, maybe that you share the feeling that you leaned on the spiritual side, but also the material living conditions very present in your work, especially in Hye-in's work about the grueling working conditions of the textile workers. I really found the story of the workers having the feeling that some presence was there really impressive when they were working with the machines, and they had the feeling that there was something. So yeah, so you can see that like the spiritual and the material merge somehow. So yeah, that was something else that I found interesting. So maybe you still want to reflect on the things that you might want to ask, and maybe you want to say something to that aspect that was so fascinating to me.
I mean, among AFSAR member, I'm not very spiritual. I'm very much like materialistic person first.
But it's always good to remind people that collectives consist of very diverse people usually.
Yes, so I try to somehow keep the balance in between the spiritual world and the material world from my own perspective and interest on my research. But I believe that, as Mooni said, there is no separation between the spiritual and the material. Because if we think about this spiritual experience as something like bodily experience coming with the continuity with our ancestors, we can also experience that in a material world where we live in the society and also state. How they function is like always dialectical with the past and present, and then we often say about spire movement. So a continuity of this cybernetic movement, also this material world having continuity as we perceive or experience the spiritual continuity. And this division between the spiritual and then the material, I think, is something to do with the modernism realistic perspective. We often like targeting to do something with it. Yeah, I think what we often do actually through the AFSAR's research, what would be the alternative way of perceive the word, and then understand the word behind of this, the known way of epistemology, let's say. And I believe this kind of artistic practice or curatorial practice could the way to actually unveil the invisible kind of world actually we are living in, but just cannot sense. So I don't think this spiritual material word a separate word. Yeah, entangled together.
Okay, yeah, thank you for reminding us. And yeah, are there any questions from the audience now? Maybe I think we need a mic.
I don't really have a question. Maybe just I wanted to point out, I don't know much about like the Asian spirituality, but when I look at the European one, it's often very influenced by patriarchy as well. And I feel like when you were talking about the female deities and what attributes we assign to them, I think it's heavily influenced also by how the patriarchal society tell these stories and kind of transform these stories into the narrative of patriarchy, basically. But I also wanted to ask where, if we can see somewhere the movie. I think it was called The Moon is Wet. Like, is there somewhere to find it?
Downstairs.
Yes, downstairs.
Ah, really?
In the exhibition, yeah. You should absolutely see it if you haven't seen it yet. And also the other films and works in the exhibition. It's absolutely wonderful and worth seeing. So go see it if you haven't. Yeah, but does anybody want to answer?
Yes, I understand what you mean, because I know in the Roman Catholic Church there's a lot of saints who suffer under this patriarchal norm, which is very, very similar to the stories around fairies in southern part of China. That's why I also, as a next step, I also want to make a kind of pilgrimage to get to know all these ladies who got ascended as a goddess, but who were suffer under this system back in that time.
That sounds like a great project, this pilgrimage. Yeah, another question?
Yeah, also just a very small comment to me. It just all sounds very much like finding forgotten female history and also rewriting that history. For me, that's kind of the frame where all you had been talking about lies within. And also not being familiar with South Asian culture, I was interested you somehow mentioned a group of women committing suicide, and I was just interested of if you could maybe elaborate a little bit more about that.
You mean the reason they commit suicide? You can imagine in ancient times, in old times, especially this southern part of China, there's no way that you will resist not to get married. Your marriage is already arranged. You're like under 10 years old and your marriage is already arranged by your parents. But to be part of somebody's family, it's not something pleasant, especially for the ladies at the time, because it's like they have a slave. It's like, I'm not exaggerating, it's like that harsh for their life. And they also buy the ladies, they have a lot of concubines, and because they need more labors. So it's no any good, it's not like beautiful image of being a family. Is more like you have to spend your whole life for this hardship, and you cannot choose your life. You cannot live like now. You cannot have a relation as you wish like now. So many ladies at the time, of course, refuse not to get married, and there are not many ways to not to get married at the time. So that's why Com Sister become very exceptional at the time, that the ladies suddenly stood up saying, actually, we don't need to be part of family because we already gained independence from the economy. So we can buy the land, we can buy the house, so we can live together from the silk industry. So it was very revolutionary. Otherwise, you decide to become a goddess, meaning you kill yourself, and the female group around you start to memorize you, and you become a goddess. Yeah, so there were not many ways of not to get married. The last one is being a monk, a female monk. That's why actually people consider Com Sister and Chaigu also. They are just saying, because they couldn't really understand why they behave in that way, they start to understand, maybe they are just Buddhism nuns group. And actually they indeed utilize these believings, saying, we are just practicing Buddhism and living together. Yeah.
Which I think is another form of like legibility and opacity. And back to the other question about the lens of patriarchy, I think a lot of these lessons or these journeys are disseminated with the narrative of nation building or frugal behavior, hard labor, and their sacrifice for the nation. You know, it's never really emphasized, at least in the Singapore script, that there are all these other radical decisions that were made, actually, that they were also exceptional in their own way. Of course, not to mythologize them as just heroes, as perfect heroes, but I think part of our work is also to pick at these threads of like dominant history and dominant nation building discourse.
Yeah, thank you, Charmaine. And we're already near the end of our wonderful event here. And I think we have seen some really intriguing strategies to build communities with spiritual backgrounds to to escape from patriarchy also in a way. And we'll just hope that we don't have to kill ourselves now in the future to escape patriarchy, and that we'll continue building vital feminist or solidarious networks in the future, like you did with AFSAR. So thank you very much for joining us, Charmaine, Christina, Hye-in, and Mooni, and thanks for having us here, and thank you for listening to us and asking questions. Thank you and have a good night.
And of course, thank you all so very much. So I don't know, can you see me now on the channel too? So thank you so much. It was really, how can I say? It was really going very, very deep. It was so touching that you were, giving us the opportunity to really enter in all these intense and also intimate, in these very harsh and strong, and in these very tense stories that you are searching for, where you're doing research, but where you also try. At least that is my understanding. On one hand, it's the research that you're doing. On the other hand, it's also to keep the stories so that they don't get lost. And I think it's such an important work that you are doing with AFSAR. So thank you all so much for letting us all participate. And for me, it was also, again, another big learning. One, of course, I already had by Charmaine's wonderful exhibition, and for all of you who haven't seen it yet, it's on view until the end of February here at PalaisPopulaire, 6 days a week, just come along. Tuesday, so tomorrow is always our closing day, but all the other days it's open, and it really worth seeing the exhibition. And of course, we also have some other accompanying programs, like tonight's talk. We have performances coming up. So just look at our website, or if you don't have our newsletter yet, go to our website and kindly subscribe. Sure.
Are they published anywhere? Because I would really like to read them. They were so interesting, and I couldn't follow everything, and I couldn't remember anything. So it would be so wonderful to be able to read them again.
I've already asked that. I have the same wish. I want to see this as a book or a film or whatever.
Need funding. So actually, we did this letter reading before, and then especially in the MBK in Berlin, and they publish on their catalog of the exhibition. So that's the way we publish this. So we need somebody actually be a magnet of us to work on, go farther. But we can discuss internally how we can make it accessible, and then maybe let you or Charmaine knows. Yeah, but thank you for the very appreciate.
I know it's really like you're capturing so many aspects in your email letter exchange. That's really fantastic. So thank you so much, and hope to see you soon here. And thank you for coming for this wonderful session. And for Christina and Charmaine, Charmaine, you have your catalog. Christina, next time you're here, we're so happy to hand it over to you and to get to know you in person. And for here, I'm very happy to hand it over now. So, thank you. It just arrived, 3 weeks ago. So it's really brand new, and there's also a little bit of course, of the moon is wet inside. So thank you.